It's great to see you all here. And we are going to get started on time. How exciting! Because there's a bunch of stuff to cover, and there's still a bunch of housekeeping. So we're going to start with this. And a couple things about this slide. We do have a land acknowledgement for the University of Minnesota that we will drop in the chat. Um, but I'm going to use the next slide in a second to talk a little bit more about that from where I am and also some sort of framing ideas about land and our relationships to indigenous cultures. Um, Also, we are at OEN Engage. Yay. We do have community norms in operation, so we will also drop those in the chat. And now would it be a good time to sign off if you don't enjoy those community norms? Um, and we are recording this session. Tonya is our maven of communications, and she will be doing some wonderful editing. I don't think you need to worry too much about your own participation in this recording, but of course, you can be aware of that and always shut off your video if that's important to you. There's some follow buttons there, and we can drop those into the chat as well so that you can link up with our socials. I personally am also on those three, LinkedIn for sort of professional updates. I use Blue Sky mostly to share articles. I do use Mastodon for all the stuff. I mean, that's where you really get behind the scenes. So feel free to find me there in addition to the Open Education Network. And with that, I want to talk a little bit about thinking about land acknowledgements and particularly for this session. And feel free to drop in the chat where you're joining from and any relationship that you might have to the territories and tribal lands that you might be on at the moment. I'm not writing, I'm here. This is me live. I'm not AI. I'm coming to you from New Hampshire, which is the unceded territory of the Abenaki, and actually live next door to Abenaki Farms, where they host quite a few tribal powwows, which is wonderful. But I wanted to spend just a minute talking about another relationship that I have to thinking about how Indigenous cultures inform how I come to these particular conversations. So, in my earliest professional life, I was a faculty member in early American literature and history. And I spent a lot of time studying Native American oral traditions and also early relationships in BIA and Indian boarding schools in the United States and North America in particular. Zakala is a Yankton Dakota Sioux, actually tangentially tribally related to the Minnesota Dakota tribes. And Zakala has an amazing book called American Indian Stories, where she talks about moving from the reservation to an Indian boarding school where she was subjected to a pretty assimilationist curriculum, right? One of the goals of the school was actually to erase that native indigenous culture. But one interesting moment in the book is when her mother is actually talking about sending her daughter voluntarily to this boarding school. And her mom says, "The pale faces who owe us a large debt for stolen lands have begun to pay a tardy justice in offering some education to our children. But I know my daughter must suffer keenly in this experiment." And this quote always sits with me when I think about higher ed, particularly in the US and North America. But this is, of course, related to many of you around the globe. Is that for Zakala and for her mom, claiming that education from white culture was an act of resistance and tardy justice. They saw themselves as owed that education. They also fully understood that that education had a sinister side. And it was both a resistant move and an oppressive move for them to go to those schools. And I feel like that tension of institutions as both liberatory sites and oppressive sites has just run through so much of my work in higher ed. And of course, the stolen lands that her mom is talking about here are lands that in part were stolen to create things like our public land grant university system in the United States. The very institutions that I have given my whole life to because I hope that they will be a site of access, social justice learning for students. So I just start with this framing because I think it does such a good job reminding us that our institutions are historically sites of tension for this kind of work. And you can learn more at Native Land Digital about your area and the tribes that were affected by the seizing of native lands, but also to think about learning about how that affected the way our educational systems have grown up. So there's my sort of rather long, and it just, I love going back to that stuff too, because it reminds me of the path I took to get into educational administration, which was really through learning about the history of our country. Um, I'm going to start today's talk by sort of situating myself. Robin DeRosa, hi, forgot to say that. I think it's listed everywhere here. I am the executive director of the OEN, somewhat newish, just since February, taking over from our founder and beloved past director, Dave Ernst. And one of the things I thought a lot about in preparing the slides today is like, what is the role of an executive director? And I realize now that could also look like something else, ED, but to ED or not to ED, that is the question. It's a weird role to be the executive director of a collective because we don't operate the way, say, a company with a CEO would operate, or even some nonprofits that are really director led. Um, we have a very small staff. Some of us you can see right here, everybody, staff, wave your hands. And a very large collective network, right? That's all you. It's very large. Our staff in no way can lead such a large collective. The collective is really led by a sort of team-based approach where all of you are doing work and we are trying administratively to assist. So, to a certain degree, I am not the person, who sets the tone. The tone is really iteratively challenging tone that's set by all of us. I also think about like competing roles around being an ED with like fire. Like, is my role to take fire? Like, basically shield people who don't have as much privilege when things are tough and sticky, and I can sort of stand up and like take that fire, maybe for staff, but particularly for educators who are doing hard work and taking fire all the time? Or is my job to be more of a diplomat and to try to quell those fires, to make it easier and less, frictiony for us to do the work we have to do? Those are two totally different things, right? To take the fire and to quell the fire. But maybe even it's more than that. Maybe I should be starting fires, right? Maybe I should be telling people, hey, you're doing the work without friction now. You need to put more friction into that work, right? And really starting fires. And I think the role probably encapsulates all of those things, which makes it a bit of a no-win situation because sometimes you're quelling when someone else thinks you should be starting. And one of the challenges I've found is that sometimes that friction is in my own head, right? I think I should be both quelling and starting and taking at the same time. So I'm working through that. You'll see it in the slide deck as we go through some of those topics that we'll cover, where there's different paths we could be taking as a collective or me as a leader in terms of how we talk about things. And I guess one of the questions is like if you're leading a collective, is the goal to become invisible, like an invisible leader, right? Like the less you see of me, the stronger the collective is. Dave and I had a lot of conversations about that in the transition, probably because he knew, I tend to have a big mouth. And so, like, what's it like to have a big mouth and run a collective, right? Is the goal to really step back? Or is it less about invisibility and more about just like clarity, helping the collective set its goals? Or is it about a clarity of leadership and mission? Or I think what I finally landed on is like, it's not really invisibility, it's not just clarity and purpose. It's the best I can really offer is transparency. As I struggle with all these rules, to just let you in on like where I am and how I'm thinking about leading us, because I'm very aware that I represent you, as we go. And I welcome you to always talk to me about how the leadership is functioning for you. Um, as I've come into working with the OEN, I've really come to think of the OEN in like two key terms. Number one is our people, right? That's the collective. The collective is not an institution. The collective is not a thing. The collective is human beings. And most of the time, that's who I'm working with, right? Like you, our staff, just actual people. And these are the guiding principles you'll see in italics there of the OEN. And I just kind of thought to myself, like, it's the people that are responsible for some of these guiding principles, particularly inclusivity, action, humanity, and integrity. That's where, it's our people who are going to assure that our network holds those things close. But the other thing that really makes the OEN different than other orgs I've been part of before is this focus on the institutional level of the work. And before I came to the OEN, that's where I spent all my time, all my brain power was in thinking about how to go from the individual to the systemic, from the individual to the institution, because it was easy for me to do open pedagogy in my class. Not just easy, but like life affirming, right? It was like, oh my God, this is the most incredible thing ever. It changed my whole life, really. And then when I saw the transformative effects, and I thought, like, what if our institutions supported work like this? It got like a little less fun real fast, right? Because that work was so hard, scaling that into our systems. And that is where the OEN really focuses a lot of its energies, how to take our collective human power as a group, and use it to transform our institutions and ask our institutions to support that work so we can really make systemic level change in the world. And that's where I think of our values of the common good, equity, and shared abundance really functioning in the OEN. So some of the questions that swirl through my head, we have this collective. How does someone become a part of our collective? A collective is different than just like anybody in the open, right? So like lots of our stuff in the OEN is open to everybody. Most of our stuff is actually open to everybody, right? Our resources are openly licensed, like everything's right there. Um, but a collective is maybe a little bit more like a commons, right? It's not just free stuff, it's also free stuff, shared values, symbiosis between investment and extraction, right? You only extract when you are putting back. So how do we build that collective and specifically what prevents someone from joining it? Yes, some people are prevented by joining it when they don't share our values and don't want to be part of it, and that's great, right? Go find another collective. But what about people who do share our values and do want to do this work? How can they become a part of this collective? And I'm going to talk about that as we go forward a little bit. Um, and also that other piece, if we are a collective, the other piece is that institutional support and transformation. Where does that institutional support come from, right? I know very well from my own experience that just because you personally are excited about open does not make your institution support open, right? So, how do we build that systemic support from our individual capacities? And do we have faith in our institutions to carry this work? Um, I go back to Zikala Shah, right? Our institutions are the place where we put our hope. We send our kids, we send ourselves. We toil inside of them to make them better. But they betray us over and over again all the time. It's sort of baked into our history in a lot of ways. So, how does the OEN think about that, knowing that we are so invested in making institutional change? So, I think those currents are going to run through this talk as I sort of try to illuminate some of the blind spots and bright sides that we are facing at this moment, both in open education and here at the Open Education Network. So we're going to start with blind spots because I think it's more fun to end with bright sides. So I have illuminated what I think are just five of these that I want to talk about, and I'm just going to move through them one at a time, sort of illuminating the stuff that's informing how I try to assist the network in my role as executive director. And I'm going to start by talking about the changing funding landscape for open education. I think many of you in this room will already know this, and I will not be happy to be the one to tell those of you who don't already know this, that Hewlett, who has been the key funder in open education in North America and also a very significant funder in open education globally, has announced to the 70-ish plus organizations, open ed organizations that it funds, that open education will no longer be a part going forward of their national and global strategy. So it doesn't mean that everything about open education will be gone, and it doesn't mean that they don't still, want to support certain kinds of work. But right now, open education is one of their central platforms, and they have told everyone that it will not be going forward. And yes, I see people giving the emoji. So I the question of whether I should even announce this, Hewlett hasn't, although we got a letter just like all the other organizations did. Um, we're going to talk about this in some detail as we go forward, but I want to let you know the things that I think that are upsetting about this besides the retraction of cash, because cash is nice, right? Like I'm happy to have your cash. And yes, transparency is key. And that's, again, you are the network, so you deserve to know all of these pieces. But some of the things I'm thinking about with Hewlett, I'm thinking about what this might do to the diversity and decentralization of the field of open education. One of our strengths as a field is that nobody owns open education. Nor do I want anyone, not even the Open Education Network, to own or be the open ed key organization. We thrive because we are decentralized and we are diverse. And I worry that in this new landscape, maybe only the strong will survive. And that Darwinian flavor is not the flavor of open education. I believe the Open Education Network is one of the strong that will and would survive. But my goal as an executive director is not to save us. It is to do this work in a field that has the ethos that we need to do the right work, right? So I'm worried about that. I'm worried about the effect on other philanthropic support. Is this going to be a moment when other funders can move into the space, or is this a cue to other funders that this space is not a space, worth supporting? And also how that message plays to the education space. For example, maybe you're trying to convince your institution to do more open education work. What does it look like to see major funders retract from that work. This is a tough one, and it's a blind spot in a true way, not only a challenge, but also we don't know yet how this will reverberate. We're going to hold tight to our values and have some other ideas as we go forward. Um, Artificial intelligence, obviously something that is shaking things up and presenting a big challenge. People just, keep asking me like, how's this going to change OER? I'm like, I don't know, but I certainly know it's going to change commercial textbook industry. And I would be more scared to be in the commercial textbook industry than I would be to be in open education right now. But it is possible that it's going to be a game changer for both how we produce and license and think about open resources, and also what it is we're doing in open education if we ultimately get to the point where there are fewer commercial textbooks to fight. Um, how do we reposition or rethink open with a different landscape? We're also thinking about other key issues with artificial intelligence, the way it functions with the commons. Many of you know the little parable of the tragedy of the commons, right? The tragedy of the commons is basically the idea that a commons will die if all that happens is extraction, right? People just go and take free stuff, take free stuff. But nobody's replanting the seed to graze the cattle, right? Like nobody's controlling how the commons gets raised, right? That's an issue. We think about humanity and care at the center of a lot of our work in open. How does that work as we move to more interaction with machines? And then things like, just minor, small things like economic and climate collapse. There's other things we could talk about here. I am hosting a thing on AI later in OEN Engage. If you want to talk more about that, we'll talk about it here as well. I also know that as much as it being a blind spot, it is in many ways a bright side for many of the folks. I don't know if Liza's in here, but Liza's the one who always comes in my head, Liza Long, because Liza, please wave in the chat if you're here. But my goodness, talk about someone doing exciting work in that area. Okay, another blind spot to look at is the privatization of public goods. This is the sort of belief that the free market will always be the most efficient way of doing anything, including teaching and learning. And taking things that, maybe in other cultures or other historical periods in your own culture might have at one time been a part of the public sector, and privatizing those things. And so we see things like limited taxing, very few people making the argument that wouldn't it be great if we paid more taxes and had more public goods, right? That's a very hard case to make in this particular moment. And the limiting of social services. People who inform me on this work, like Tressie McMillan Cottom and Christopher Newfield, who write about this specifically in relationship to higher ed. But one of the ways we see this emerging is the idea that going to college is a private good that's going to help you personally as a student make more money in the future, and that college should deliver the goal of helping you secure a job and make money and participate in the labor market. Therefore, you should pay for it privately because you're going to get that private economic benefit. And that ends up affecting all sorts of things, like the devaluation, for example, of the humanities, because you can't get a job in English literature. I say that with all the irony in the world because, of course, I got a job with English literature. And we know it's actually a fallacy that humanities majors don't perform as well, even economically, in the job market. But those fallacies function, right, in the same way that, for example, your English department is cut because it is not delivering as many revenues to your school because there aren't as many English majors. But they're not looking at all the service courses that English is teaching, right? Because they're not looking at that public good they're looking at that private return. So this is really changing the shape of education, in addition to all the things that surround education that make our students unable to take time to go to college, right? So that is one of the blind spots I'm really focused on. Another has to do with equity, diversity, and inclusion. I like to put them in that order, just to remind us that those words are actually real. Like it's not just a thing, right? DEI that means nothing. The words and the work are both under fire. So you can see here that a current presidential executive order characterizes diversity, equity, and inclusion programs as illegal and immoral discrimination, which means many schools have had to retract or mask the work that they're doing in these areas in order to continue receiving federal funding that they use to serve some of our most vulnerable students, right? So God forbid anybody thinks this is a very simple problem to solve, right? It is not. Just being brave enough to speak truth to power is not necessarily going to solve this problem, because you have actual students who could be harmed by the retraction of those funds. It puts the Open Education Network in a funny position, trying to figure out how to do the work that we do, which, however you want to slice it, has always been focused on these things: equitable learning environments, inclusion in learning resources, right? People being able to see themselves reflected and make those learning resources more relevant to their needs and lives. Um, and the diversity of the knowledge commons, right? Believing that the more people who are participate in the knowledge commons, the stronger the knowledge will be. So all of our central work is affected by our ability or inability to work in these spaces. And then finally, just a list of things. You could make a much longer one, but a list of things that higher ed is struggling around right now. Sometimes these struggles are not negative. This is not a list of all horrors. Some of these are not horrors. For example, workforce training. There's lots of people in this room right now who are working on this and doing amazing things, right? These are just issues that are changing how we deliver education, how we think about education. The reduction of public support means both like what people believe about higher education in particular, and then also the actual retraction of public dollars. Workforce training is, replacing the idea of a liberal arts education, right? So we can see in the last 30 years that we've really started to reposition what college means in a lot of ways. Accreditation is shifting to be much more ideological, with much more explicitly ideological goals. We talked a little bit about free speech and academic freedom and cuts to the humanities. We've got a professoriate that is becoming increasingly gigafied, and was already very gigafied. So that can be very difficult. I think the open education world knows very well the challenges of trying to support this work with people who are often doing it sort of on the side of their jobs. Or, I mean, in my last institution, like we had a posse of just amazing adjuncts who were carrying a lot of our open education work while they were simultaneously being paid $3,500, per class. So we've got issues there. We also see this sort of shape of what education looks like and the kinds of new things we're building. The OEN is involved in a lot of these things, trying to participate. Particularly, Tanya's been doing some great work in dual enrollment lately, and lots of you guys have been doing all sorts of cool stuff. And of course, the ed tech industry is changing things, has been changing things for decades, right? To the tune of billions of dollars per year. Um, so all of these things shift the landscape into which we come with our ideas about open education. But I kind of want to make the claim that those exact things that I just talked about, like, are weirdly aligned like weirdly aligned with exactly what we are prepared to do right now. Like you couldn't have created a set of problems better suited for open education to solve than the problems that we have now. And I use the word solve like this because these are wicked problems, right? They're not problems that we fix. They're problems that we engage in. And I guess what I would say is that if you look at these problems, we can go one at a time to say, like, this is exactly what we're designed for. And that makes me feel, if not hopeful, some days I feel hopeful, some days I feel, smashed in the head. But I certainly feel like I'm in the right place at the right time to do the right work. And let's talk about that. So, the changing funding landscape. Nobody in the OEN is happy that we're going to lose Hewlett funding. We are funded in part by Hewlett and have been since the day Dave, birthed us. Hewlett was always one of our big supporters. But here's the thing: our network was not built to be funded by external sources. Our network was built as a collective, as a commons, where we would have a very lean organization and everyone would pay very small dollars in, and we would use that to share expertise and resources. So we have a funding model through our institutional membership that puts the burden for sustaining us on the institutions that can support this work. And I come from, I think I can say before the University of Minnesota, one of the most under-resourced institutions in the United States of America. I'm very proud of New Hampshire for being 50th in public funding. But the OEN keeps our membership fees low enough that almost any institution can find a path to join this network. And that is our model. I believe this, I'm not saying we don't want to pursue other philanthropy. We do for sure. We'll be diversifying, looking in those areas. But we have a model that basically suggests education needs to shift its design just a bit so that education can fund the education that we want. So that's the model that we have, and we believe really strongly in it. I also look at AI, and I just can think of no field or group better than open education to think about how we look at this new set of technologies and make sure that we are being creative with them and that we are keeping humans at the center. That is what we do. We are a tech forward a tech forward field, right? We only exist because of the ability to use digital resources, right? And we did that in such a creative way, right? I just think of like how Creative Commons undergirds a lot of the work of open. That was a giant revolutionary idea that flowed through technology that was not designed to do that kind of thing. And I think we are poised to take on the challenge of AI, whether that means leveraging it, whether that means revising it, critiquing it. We are the people, I think, who are ready to do this work. Who is ready to take on the privatization of public goods? That's what we're designed for, right? We are designed a movement focused around raising the visibility of the public good and the concrete practices that contribute to it. I think one of the challenges I used to have early in my career is I would say, like, the public good. And then someone would say, like, what do you mean? And at the beginning, I couldn't answer that question. I was like, it's a thing, right? Like public good. You know what? I could write a paper now. I could write a bullet list. I could write a description of a course I teach and how it benefits the public, right? I understand what it means to think about knowledge as a public good, to think about education as a public good, to make that case to people and to help the public understand that they are enriched in every way when we transition away from the holding of privatized goods into open. That is, we're ready. Like we are those people. And then when you think of that diverse list of all the challenges and opportunities going on in higher ed right now, I don't know who I would trust more than the open community, right? When you think about dual enrollment, or any of the things on that list, do you want to outsource that? Think about micro credentialing, for example. There's so many cool things going on in open with micro credentials right now. Or we could outsource that to some ed tech company that makes badges and is going to scrape the commons and create, little micro nuggets. Why? We have everybody we need to do all of the things on that work. Even things like the partisan move in accreditation. Um, this is all internal academic stuff. This is our field. We're in it. We're inside these institutions. So we are poised to really have impact in these spaces. And we need to engage our institutions so that it's not just us, but it's our institutions that are listening to us, right? In my old institution, I used to always talk about, like, I'd be walking around with a fresh baked cookie, offering it to the institution, like, here's a cookie I baked you, and they would say, "Oh, what's your damn cookie?" We have to make our institutions accept our cookies, because we have what we need to solve these problems, and it's on us to build that institutional capacity. So we're not just doing that work in isolation, but we are systemically making inroads into solving some of these problems. And there's some really good news for us as we start thinking about that systemic change. Many of you have heard that AAC&U has just listed open education as a new high impact practice. Heather, I don't know if you're here, but shout out to you for all the work you've done on this, and all the folks in the compacts and everywhere. The coolness about this, the HIPs, the high impact practices, I mean, there isn't a website on this earth for any college or university that isn't espousing something related to high impact practice. To be able to point to this, I mean, we already knew this, right? But be able to point to this when we're talking to our institutions, we really got, I think, a big hand from AAC&U to do this work. And they are presenting some of this data, much of this research you did. Like, I'm pointing at you, people in this room, like, you wrote these reports, you did this work, you pounded the pavement. I remember a decade ago, trying to do design experiments to prove that open pedagogy was helping, right? Like, all that messy work we've done, it's paid off. And now we have really shiny reports that talk about the impact of using OER and open education and pedagogies. Um, but I will point to this really interesting note in the AAC&U High Impact Practice Report, which is that faculty experiences varied considerably depending on institutional support. And that is where the OEN comes in. We want to make sure that individually our members of the collective have the professional development they need, the community support, the infrastructure, platforms, publishing, all the stuff. But we're also here to help you build that systemic capacity inside your colleges and universities so that we can really shift how this world is thinking about education. And we are growing in this work. My last count, and it's up and down, of course, but my last count was, I think, about 1,803 colleges and universities served, most of them here in North America, but also growing. So, hello, Ireland. Hello, Ireland coming on board. And when I say hello, Ireland, I mean like the literal country. Welcome. I just was there visiting with them as they signed on to the OEN. I did have to take one for the team and go to a lot of pubs. That was not apocryphal. That was real. If you're going to work with the Irish, you're going to go to the pubs. But so much great work going on with the Ireland and UK community of practice, in addition to all of the amazing work that we've seen here in North America, community colleges, R1s, tribal colleges, minority serving institutions, private colleges, public colleges, large colleges, tiny colleges. We're all here, and it's an impressive network. And it makes me it makes me proud of open education that, we've come here. Um, some cool stuff starting. We have a newly revised senior leaders briefing. It will likely be in November and likely be co-sponsored by our wonderful regional compacts. You'll hear more about this, but we want to help you build that institutional capacity. We know it doesn't come out of thin air. So getting your senior leaders on board is going to be a piece of that. Our new strategic plan will launch this fall. You will have opportunity to weigh in on that, and you'll hear more about it. There will be no surprises in the strategic plan, just laser focus and the readiness to do this work. We have some new certificate pathways coming up that are absolutely so cool. Just the whole structure of how the PD program is going to work, I think, is going to be pretty awesome for everybody. And I don't want to say because like we haven't fully done it, but like some cool stuff. Okay, some cool free stuff. I mean, I know that's what we're all about, cool free stuff, but like even cooler, freer stuff than you are used to with some of these certificate pathways. Just give me a couple more weeks because there's still things to iron out with that. I am going to be personally running a new webinar series for folks who don't have institutional capacity to join the OEN on how to be part of our network, but also how to build that institutional capacity. So you can look for that starting this winter, and that's a great way to bring more folks into the work. I truly believe that our network, I don't know an organization better poised to meet this moment, both in its opportunities and its challenges. And when I say the network, I don't mean me and the staff. We are a pretty tiny sliver of this group, right? I mean, think of 1,800 institutions. How many people is that? We don't have that data. Maybe Barb does, but I don't think we'd have to crunch it. Somebody would have to do that work. It's a lot of people. And that is who does this work. And what our job is as a staff and a leadership team is to help deliver what you need to build those systemic level changes. And in order for us to know what you need, we have to hear from you often, and we have to have your participation. So I want to thank those of you who are working in the many, many areas of our leadership teams and in our many committees and groups. You can always write to open at UMN and just be like, hey, look, I'm a psychology professor. I just learned about this last week. I really want to be part of things. I don't know what to do, right? Like we'll help you because sometimes it can feel overwhelming. I remember very well the first couple years working in the space and not knowing what was what. If you want to be involved, you can absolutely be involved in our network by attending things or being part of our leadership teams. We do have a community leaders page that's in the chat to kind of see who's leading us now, because like I said, it's basically not our little tiny staff. It's all of you. We have a couple of specific opportunities that are, interviewing right now. So if you're interested in those, you can check those out in particular. We will drop those in the chat as well. But the long and short of all of that stuff is just that the network and the whole sort of collective approach, right? And the reason why we don't need Hewlett. And again, Hewlett, if you're listening, come back. It's fine. Like we'll take you back anytime. But we don't need it. We have what we need to do this work by sharing with each other, partnering, collaborating. You don't need to do this work alone in isolation. If there's something you want to bring to your institution and it feels too heavy, I can guarantee we can probably set you up with almost everything you need to do it with very little reinventing of the wheel. So count on your network to be here for you. We do in 15 minutes have our next session, and this session is, technically at its close. Oh, and there you go, Barb, in the link there. One of the links isn't working. So Barb will work on that in the chat. But I do want to say, like, if you need to drop off now, that's great. Please come back and see us for the rest of Engage, and for the post-Engage series as well. So OEN Engage is today and tomorrow. But after that, for the duration of the summer, we also have some other sort of pop-up events on the menu. So please see all of that stuff. It will be in the chat as well. This slide deck is available right now, because you just might feel like that was so impactful that you need to look at it again this second. But Tonya will also be collecting all of this stuff, putting the recordings together and all the resources. So that's going to be coming back for you later. So here's the deal. If you need to drop off now to prepare to come into Tanya's session on the new certificate program, which is next, that's great. Goodbye. But if you want to stick around for a second and you got some questions, I'm happy to stay. Staff, if you need to go, get ready for other things, please go. Martine, don't leave because maybe the Zoom will shut off if you do.
I'm gonna
Uh,
look up the live link. The Z links are being wonky this morning, so I'm gonna look up that Colleague Connector program application link and drop it in the chat in just a minute.
cool. So here's the thing. Do you want to just raise your hand if you have a question or thought or comment? I think it'd be worth spending 5 more minutes just, you know, chatting. And if you raise your hand, I think it'll pop right up to the front of my screen. We're not too big of a group to do that. Anybody have anything? You could also type it in the chat, which I can now see. What are you most excited to tackle? That's a great question. I guess I'll say two things. The first is that people keep calling me to participate in their AI stuff. Like, so two things that are coming up. One is, I could put these in the chat, but I don't have them ready right now. But maybe somebody clever can find them. Clover Park Technical College is hosting a pretty big AI and open institute. It's free, anybody can go, and I'm keynoting that along with Susan Adams, who's amazing, doing a separate keynote. I'm also going to North Carolina in a couple of months for a statewide conversation about open and AI. As those of you who come to my AI thing later tomorrow will see, I'm pretty flummoxed and pretty concerned. I don't enjoy that work all the time. Sometimes it makes me upset in different ways. But I think it's important, and I am definitely keen to try to figure out how my voice can be helpful to this conversation as we go forward. So that's one piece. The other is this webinar series on on-ramps to building institutional capacity. It might be helpful for all of us in this room, institutional capacity building, but the people in this room have some institutional capacity because you have joined the OEN, and that was not easy, right? Like $1,700, whatever your rate is, like that is not always easy. But there's lots of folks who don't even have that, and they're working in isolation. They're feeling demoralized. They're feeling persecuted in this work. And I'm looking forward to creating some outreach from the OEN for those folks so that they can feel seen and also maybe have a little bit of support, whether they build capacity to join the OEN or just build capacity. I'm not sure it matters, but I'm excited to tackle that. So, see, look, everyone's already talking about cool AI things. I'm happy to take one more, and then I'll, if you have it, it's okay. There's a lot of conversation in the chat about whether links work. Anybody else want to raise a hand or ask a question? Then what I'm going to say, folks, is thank you. Thank you for being here for Engage, but mostly thank you for being in community in this work. It's really hard work right now, I think. And some days when I'm stuck in a lot of administrative stuff, it can feel like a slog. And then I show up like in West Virginia for some open events that y'all are running, and I realize like, oh my God, this is not depressing. This is life-giving. So let's just stay focused on the work and supporting each other. And please know that you can contact me anytime directly by email if you've got stuff, particularly about how our network could do better for this meeting this moment and giving you what you need. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you in a few minutes at Tanya's sneak peek of the new certificate program, if you can make it there. Otherwise, we'll see you at other stuff through the next 2 days and beyond. So thanks to everybody and have a great day.